Okay, I think I got it. Can you explain that again?
Yeah, it's a juice subscription connected to Wi-Fi.
I still don't get it. Welcome to another episode of Horses with Horns. My name is Nicholas.
And I'm Indranil.
This is our fourth episode, and we decided to title it, Can You Explain That Again? And this is all about having a clear pitch. We're going to talk about the importance of communicating what your business is all about to others, what a bad pitch or a bad description of your businesses might look like, and also what may guide you to have a clear one that it's easier to understand by everybody, from friends to investors and customers. And later on, we're also going to hear from a good friend of the podcast, Aayush, who has tons of startup experience. So let's get started. The first point is, what is the importance of having a clear pitch? Indranil, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think having a clear pitch is really important for basically any function that you can have as a founder of a business, whether it's as an operator or as the founder themselves. You need to be able to describe what you want to do in order to communicate with your customers, in order to hire people, in order to get money if you're looking for investors. You basically just need to be able to sell the idea very cleanly to anyone.
Makes sense. When you talk about anyone, and how do you time or how do you differentiate the pitch between I'm on the street talking to someone, I'm talking to a friend, or I'm having an actual business presentation?
So I think it really depends on what you want out of that conversation. I'm sure we'll end up talking about this at some point, but you should always be pitching. Like, as a founder or somebody who's working at a business, you need to always be talking to people about your idea. But so using your example of talking to somebody on the street, I think you can tailor it such that you have a very short elevator speech for them. It's just less than 20 seconds. Just tell them what is the core of your idea. Versus if you are really looking to engage this person in a conversation and either hire them or sell to them, then you might need to tell them a bit more. But I think you really want to walk away with making sure that they're asking you more questions and they have an interest in what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. I actually had three interesting examples, three things that happened to me, I think in the course of the past 10 days.
Really?
Chronologically, I had a conversation with someone that I was asking basically industry research insights. I was trying to understand the industry better to position the services of my consulting company more adequately. And it's funny because as I was on the phone with him, and I was explaining, hey, this is sort of what I'm trying to do, and I'm asking questions like this, and I'm talking to leaders like yourself. When I finish basically my ask of like, hey, just share with me what your problems are, and I describe my business, he basically goes, I have no idea what you said, but here's some of my problems. So he was kind enough to say, I don't know, but I'm going to tell you my side of the conversation anyway.
So even though he didn't actually know what you do?
He said he had no idea what I said. Like, I talked for like 15, 20 seconds, and he said, I have no idea what you said. But here are some of the problems that I'm facing in my business. So I guess he understood that the main point of the conversation was getting a sense of what's going on in the industry. But whatever I said was not clear.
So you were trying to sell him, though? Like, you wanted his business? Or
No. I was basically explaining. I was giving him context into why I wanted to ask him for insights into the industry. I was separating. I didn't want to sell. I mean, potentially one day, maybe, right? But
okay.
But I was trying to separate the conversation. Just say, give me some insights. Share with me some of your problems so that I can adequately position my services.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in me giving him context, he didn't get it. Another thing that happened is on a pure sales call earlier, someone that I was trying to pitch to when I finished, he basically said, I have no idea what you said. And then he started to guess. Sorry, are you saying you do this? And I went like, no, I'm saying this. So this, no, this other thing. So that's horrible news, right? The moment you start to guess back and forth, and not surprising, it ended just send me some information via email. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Right?
I think if you're in a selling conversation and they have no idea what you're doing, probably did not have the best start.
No, yeah, very bad. So, and the third one was just having dinner or brunch, really. Yeah, brunch. Late breakfast with some friends. And she asked me, so what is your business? Much more casual setting. And I said, that question's always difficult to answer. And I answered it in some way. But I don't know if it was necessarily remembered, or if it, if I ask, it's been like a week now. I don't know if she remembers or she can explain it back to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the important parts of any good pitch is exactly that. Like, it needs to be memorable, because I think the goal of your pitch, again, whether it's a founder, operator, whatever it is that somebody can take action on that. I think for me personally, I've mostly done pitching in the lens of recruiting and hiring people to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, part of that is you have to be very clear, like, what is the business that you're working on? What is the role going to be? And just make sure that it's crystal clear what both of those are. Leave room for questions, but also they should remember. Like, they should, it should be memorable enough that they not only understand, but they also care and might reach back out, even if it's not the right time.
Yeah, definitely. This is somewhat of a parallel example to that, but this is a data scientist that has had experience looking at dating site data, and his name is Seth Stevens Davowitz, I think. Sorry if I mispronounced. And he basically shared, the people that end up going on most dates is exactly who you think will do it. Brad Pitt, beautiful people, right? But then the next tier of people that go on a lot of dates, that date very successfully, is a group of people that is somewhat unexpected. It's people that have a very defined brand, blue hair, or they stand out based on their clothing they choose. For lack of a better word, they look kind of weird, right? But those people can clearly communicate, this is what I'm about. Most of us get lost in that clutter of like everyone's kind of the same, but the people that weren't necessarily blessed with the best looks, they do have the option of saying, well, how do you stand out? How do you make your a message that's clear? And I think that translates to business very well.
Yeah, I agree. Where, I think you and I have faced it actually, where at some of the earlier stage companies we worked for, we didn't have a lot of like cool elements. We had a very nice product. We had good traction in the market, but there were always bigger companies with fancy perks and stuff. Mm-hmm. So we had to differentiate by being very clear about what the opportunity was, and that this is where we're at as a company. This is what we do. Yeah. This is how we're different. And this is what we can win with. So
going to a more concrete kind of realm, what do you think is an example of a bad pitch? Is there something that comes to mind, or an example that you can share?
Yeah, not to be kind of doing a bad pitch here myself, but I think without being too specific, there was one that I saw in the industry that I currently work in right now that was just straight up word salad. Like, that was what it was, where it was just every industry buzzword about mental health possible. Mm-hmm. And that's the entirety of the pitch, where it just walks away where you have no idea what the product even is. It's just vaguely in the mental health space.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you think was it because, I mean, you didn't craft that pitch, right? But do you think that pitfall of choosing jargon or like buzzwords, do you think that's because the team doesn't have clarity internally, or because they just don't know how to explain it?
That's a really good question. I think it can be both. I think it can be a little bit industry specific. Like right now, with the amount of ChatGPT and AI companies come up,
Yeah.
I guarantee a lot of them have no idea what they're talking about, and their pitches are going to be like that. It will be jargon heavy because they're just trying to get money for something they don't even understand.
Yeah.
I don't think that's always the case, though. I do think sometimes you have a pretty good sense of what your company is and what you want to do, but you just haven't spent enough time writing it down. Like, I think a pitch is always more clear in your own mind than it actually is when you say it to others. Like, even using you as an example, you know what your company is about. You know what your consultancy is, but people don't necessarily get it right away.
I would say that there's two components to that. I think it's that, yes, I am more aware of what I'm doing. But I also, because I'm so close to it, I could also be confused by my own definitions. I think going through the process of telling other people what you're doing, it helps you reinforce it to yourself as well, especially when you start to kind of realize that people don't get it. Then you say it to yourself and you realize you kind of don't get it either. So I think it's I would almost guarantee that if someone is not clear about their business, it's because they're not clear about it internally either. Or they may feel like they're clear about it, but not really. Or they just haven't decided to be specific enough yet.
So I think that maybe then goes hand in hand with, first, why is it a bad pitch? And then also, how do you fix it? Like, I think it will make your company stronger to spend time making sure that you understand your pitch and making sure it's clear to others. Because just in case, it might be unclear to yourself and you don't even realize that until you write it down and realize that I don't know how to write this in 20 seconds or less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I've not seen it from a pitch perspective, but I do remember when, and you and I did this actually together a few years ago now. Do you remember we were trying to come up with a mission statement?
Oh, that was terrible.
Right. So the mission statement is, it's almost like the cousin of the pitch, right? Where you're not necessarily describing the business externally or what the business model is in very few words, but you're also trying to describe like whys and maybe more philosophical things, or taking a business model into more of a purpose. That is also very difficult, but it's not exactly a pitch per se.
At the same time, though, I'd actually argue that it is. I think a good mission statement, not to get too far off topic here, but a good mission statement and a good pitch is kind of very related, where if you have a mission-driven company, which I think you should, then having a good mission statement that very clearly articulates this is exactly who we're building for, why we're doing what we're doing, and doing it in a very succinct way so that anyone understands what you're about.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of your pitch. Like your mission statement is kind of the center of all of your pitches, and then you just tailor on top of that.
Makes sense. One of the things that I think it's interesting and maybe an exception to some extent, and it's funny because I have it in my notes and you also said it, is ChatGPT. So ChatGPT came up very recently, fairly recently, right? And it. How do you think the public? Do you feel like beyond people in technology, are people aware of what ChatGPT is?
I think it depends largely on age group, but I mean, I've talked about it with my mom, so I think it's pretty out there.
Okay, yeah. So I think the term people are familiar with, but if you say like, hey, I can do, I can solve, I can offer you cleaning services using ChatGPT, just to come up with something. I think to a good sector of the business population, that doesn't mean much, and I feel like a lot of people are familiar with AI, with artificial intelligence, right? Like they know what it is, but they don't necessarily know what it is to hear it when you include it in the pitch of your business. So from my perspective, I thought about it to say like, okay, what if you mention a word or a term that is so popular, right? Does it explain, does it do a good service to your pitch? Does it make it clearer to include it? When I thought about it, I kind of concluded that it's not. I mean, maybe it keeps it equally direct, as the terminology stays trendy, but I don't think it adds much to it.
We might also be touching on a couple of things here where I like in our very, very intro talking about a juice subscription on Wi-Fi. That is, of course, talking about Juicero, which was a company. So yeah, talking about cleaning service on GPT. On one hand, that doesn't even make sense. Forget as a pitch. It's not a company.
Right.
So I think writing down your pitch, and if it is really that nonsensical, then your company probably is nonsensical. But also at the same time, even if your company can make sense, but you're just throwing buzzwords in there, that could be a warning sign that first it's not clear enough, but also, where's the actual value here?
Yeah, I do think saying something like ChatGPT could come in into a longer pitch, and maybe even to investors, or to a potential client. But once you've reached that how, tell me more about it. How are you going to go about your offering? Once you get down to that level, I think that bringing up something buzzwordy could be beneficial, maybe, if you explain it correctly. But what does a good pitch then look like to you?
To me, a good pitch is free of buzzwords as much as possible. Like, unless you are truly building around one buzzword. For the most part, lack of buzzwords, should be short, should be concise. And I actually do think, now that we're talking through, it should be mission oriented. You should make sure that you're talking about who is what you're building for, who is it for, how are you going to achieve it, like very specifically, what are you building to solve that group's needs?
Mm-hmm.
And again, most importantly, just keep it simple and keep it short.
Okay. Is there a company in particular that you think has a really good one?
I'd have to think of an example. Who have I seen that's done that very well? I think a lot of sportswear brands do it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the tech space, I'll have to look this up. I feel like some of big tech, which has, of course, at this point spent so much money on getting this right, they have very clear statements.
Yeah.
Does any come to mind for you?
Yeah, I actually saw one very recently. I may be getting the name of the company wrong, but it's something like Dallas DBAs is the name of the company. And I'll tell you what the one-liner of the company is if I remember. I don't remember word by word, but the one-liner kind of went something like this. We fix your database problems with fractional DBAs, right? Database administrators.
I'm going to admit I don't fully understand that.
Interesting. So when I saw it, I thought it was, maybe I'm not wording it correctly now, but I thought like, oh, okay, so you come into the database and you fix it. You fix whatever may be going wrong.
That could be a simpler pitch. That might work.
It was probably explained, when I read it, I remember going like, wow, this is really clear. So for me, what I try to do, the quick format that I kind of want to follow is name, company, who, and what. And normally what I do with that...
I'm just going to look up one pitch in the meantime.
And just for sake of example, I actually wrote one down. Hi, I'm Nicolas from the Horses with Horns. We have a podcast for people with entrepreneur aspirations, and we share ideas, learnings, and things to consider.
Yeah, pretty concise.
So that's kind of a format that I like to follow. And the reason why you saw me hesitate a little bit is because I didn't write it out word by word, which I actually do recommend. Like there's many things that you have to write out and say one word at a time exactly like you wrote it until it becomes second nature. You'll be able to change it here and there or explain it in different words or whatnot. But there's many things that you have to memorize so that they become available to you whenever you need it. And having a pitch ready for any moment is super important.
Totally agree. I think at the start, you absolutely should write it down. I think over time, you will say it enough that you will remember it. And also that alone is also a good test that if you as the founder do not know what you're talking about after doing the pitch 20 times, it's probably too complicated. So write it down at the start, but then, if it is clear enough, you will remember it.
Yeah, and I would say one way that I would differentiate the what and the how, I guess, is that the what is more result driven and how is method driven, right? So I would emphasize the what. We're able to achieve this, or my company, me, whoever you're pitching, right? Whether it be you as a person, the company that you've started. Focus on the result and who you're targeting, I think is important, because even if you're talking to a relative that is not a potential customer or someone that necessarily is in the circles of your business, it still is good to say this is intended for these people, right? So that when you do talk to someone, they're like, oh, I am one of those people. They can clearly associate themselves to what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree. One of the ones that I looked up, whether this is a pitch or just like a very succinct one-liner, but it's something that hopefully does resonate, is Airbnbs, which is find the perfect place to stay at any price. So I think very clearly says this is what the website does. You can come on here. I think it said in like 100 plus countries even. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for a place to stay, you can find one and it will fit any budget.
Yeah, that's actually very clear. And that is what it is. One interesting thing though, and I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but it's interesting that Airbnb targeted the people staying at them and not the people renting the spaces. The pitch to people that are renting a room is different, right?
Yeah.
But the company ultimately favor one side of their marketplace.
On the consumer-facing site. So I think that actually goes back to the mission values alignment there of you have to know who you're talking to when you're pitching, where your audience matters, right? Yeah. Like if you are pitching in Airbnb's example to the consumer side, then you have to talk about where people are going to stay, price points, things like that. Perhaps if you're pitching the renter, or I guess, like the person who owns the place, it would be a different pitch about easily find vetted tenants.
Right.
Something of that sort.
Be able to rent quickly or something. But one thing that I've realized, because I've been in a couple of marketplace businesses where you kind of have to choose one. I do believe that pitching both at the same time is a bad idea.
Almost never works.
Yeah, does not work. Makes it unclear. You basically, it's almost like you're saying, if you're like this or if you're like that, you created a list of, your company turned into a list of services. Yeah. That's not optimal. But the other thing is that you ultimately have to choose by default which side of the marketplace you're going to lean towards. And I personally, just as a rule, I don't know if it's more effective, but maybe, I choose who is paying, who's providing and who's paying, who's the money side of the transaction.
This could be a good future topic, but
yeah,
I feel like, and again, future topic, but I would say supply side. Like in Airbnb's example, both sides are actually paying.
Oh yeah, but,
just in general, I think you should find supply first.
Maybe which one? Well, chronologically, yes. If you're just getting started, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you don't have supply, then you have nothing to offer.
In a marketplace specifically.
Yeah. But I do think that it's interesting to favor that side For whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure if it works better. It just seems to make sense in my head when you have to choose one default. But anyway, maybe this is a really good time to hear from.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think this is a great time to hear from Aayush. He will do a much better job of explaining how to succinctly do a perfect pitch. He has helped hundreds of companies as well as kind of worked on hundreds of ideas during his time at various startup accelerators and incubators, kind of working on the investing side as well. So looking forward to hearing from Aayush.
Hey guys, my name is Aayush. I'm based here in New York City. I run business operations for an early stage health tech startup. But prior to this, I was at a venture studio where I had a chance to run through hundreds of different ideas on the early stage. And a big part of my job was communicating the ideas I was working on to various different stakeholders, whether it's friends, family, experts, founders, people on my research team, et cetera. And in doing that hundreds of times over, I've come across a couple of key learnings that I've personally taken away that I feel like are helpful, at least when I think about continuing to express new ideas I'm working on, whether those are specific net new business ideas or just general product ideas. So I'll just run through them real quick. The first one I think is so obvious, but still worth just always stating, which is just like keeping things as simple and short as possible. There's so many tests for this, the 5-year-old test, the grandparent test, just like making sure your language, no matter how niche the product or the space you're working on is, as jargon-free as possible. And one very tactical thing that I found to be helpful is forcing yourself, even in the early days, to like distill the language down using a landing page or a digital ad. It really like gives you very limited real estate and forces you to make some decisions on what are the most effective, valuable words to choose when given, scarce number of characters to put out there. So that's number one. Number two is, if you do that right, the conversation, whoever you're having this with, will ideally be led by the person you're talking to. And so an effective conversation to me is no longer me talking for a couple minutes, explaining what the business is or the market I'm playing in, but rather just sharing just enough information to pique the interest of the party I'm talking to. And a successful conversation I've discovered is really having them lead the rest of the conversation, where it's their curiosity and their set of questions that drive the rest of the information forward. It just leads to a better, more natural conversation where I feel like both parties come out taking away more. The third thing is just like, if you have the opportunity to prepare a bit for the conversation you're entering into, is having a thought, taking into account who you're talking to. There's so many applications of like what specifically, what implications are, right? Whether or not they have domain expertise, would they understand the business model that you're going after, et cetera. But even more generally, I think what I like to think about is how is their brain wired? And generally, I bucket this into they're either magic or money driven. Again, gross generalization, but to me, the magic side of the house is what excites them as a human is interesting insights, needs, really focusing on the user and the persona that you're working for and focusing on in your company. And so for this type of person, I think leading on user interviews or a key insight that has come up in primary research, or just focusing on fundamentally on the need that you're solving, is often a great way to get the conversation started. On the other side, for people that I call are money driven, it's really just about nuts and bolts, right? These are more practical people that at the end of the day are constantly trying to jump ahead and trying to figure out what you're saying. And so naturally, I find in these conversations, it's better to just start off very, very straightforward, right? Just using basic language to describe what it is you're going after, what your business model is, what the features are, what exactly, from a very practical, tactical level, what is it that you are looking to put out in the world or explore. So just a helpful framework to think about when deciding what a better narrative is to design around. The last thing I'll say is that I found super helpful is just being honest with yourself where in your idea journey you are. If you're truly still at a place where you know you're more exploring problems and exploring potential solutions and haven't yet arrived at full conviction on what it is that you might go build, I think it's better to go into conversations you're having, whether it's with friends of friends, general networking, to pitch to pitch what you're working on really in a more broad way. So really focusing on the problem space, the focus area, maybe the insight, rather than and avoiding as much as possible, talking about specifics like a platform or the actual product that you might build. Because, at this stage, really the goal is for you to learn about the unknown unknowns, right? You want as many introductions as possible. You want to find other experts, find other users to speak to. And so continuing to frame it in a broad way, I found in those early conversations can help you get more out of those conversations as well. So, it leads to you learning about how the person you're talking to, what words they use when talking about the problem. It really moves from being a pitch to a conversation where the focus is also less on the initial pitch you're giving and more about the effectiveness with which you can ask follow-up questions, right? And your success here will probably look like you coming out of this conversation with new introductions for people that you can go talk to, understanding potential relevant tactics or competitors in the space that you weren't previously aware of. And so it's just a complete reframe on how you're talking about your company or your idea, which is from a perspective of learning rather than communicating and broadcasting and pitching, really. But yeah, those are the 4 general things I've learned and that I continue to use as I talk about ideas I'm working on.
Ayush, thanks, man. That was awesome. We have to play tennis sometime soon. But yeah, really thank you for your perspective on this. Really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. Very informative. What did you think? What do you think stood out of that, his comments?
I think one of the really interesting things that I hadn't really thought about before was using the pitch as a way to not only get feedback, but actually to really start to ask questions and learn more about the gaps where, I think very often people think about pitching as selling, but pitching is also about learning and understanding. As we were talking about, is it clear to me? But also, hey, is this even the right approach? Should I actually be thinking about other things in my product?
Yeah, I always thought of pitching start to end as you start pitching. If it's engaging, people pay attention. And when you finish, they give you a check, right? Best pitch ever. But hearing some of his thoughts has kind of turned that into a different angle, of saying, no, a really good pitch, or the way that you can measure a really good pitch is when people ask you, tell me more. And when they ask you questions, right? A pitch is just the start of the conversation. That's it. It's not, when you finish, here's all the money that you're asking for or anything like that. That's interesting. It's just a positioning of getting the conversation going.
Right. And I think it's also important that, and this is one of the things he mentioned, where you are in the stage of your business can also matter. Where if you're very, very early on, your pitch is really more about learning and can you get people to ask you questions and even engage and figure out, is this the right thing? What can I build to make this more impactful for people? Whereas further on, to your point, not every conversation is going to lead to getting a check. Like, especially if you're selling an enterprise software or something, Your pitch is the first conversation of maybe a 6-month conversation.
Right. Pitching, right. Yeah. Pitching is not something that is done in 2 minutes.
No.
Pitching is something that happens over the course of many meetings. Ultimately, when you think about, especially for software, right, when you think about the sales process, many times there is the salesperson, and down the line supported by a support or sales engineer or someone like that adds that technical angle, but much further down the line, which is interesting when you think of the pitch as many conversations, not just the one.
Right. Definitely.
Perfect. So very insightful, a lot of really good stuff. Pitching is very important. Practice. I'm going to get to practicing, like I shared at the beginning of the episode. Just in the past 10 days, I had those 3 moments of saying, okay, it's not clear, right? So really it's a learning process. And it's something that we just got to, keep trying to do.
Definitely.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. See you next episode.